This episode is proudly sponsored by Resilience Through Fitness. RTF's whole body health approach focuses on helping first responders get adequate rest, fuel, and physical preparedness for their challenging shifts serving the communities they love. The RTF coaching staff are all current first responders that have a passion for fitness. With one-on-one online coaching tailored specifically to your gym, home, and traveling needs, the staff strives to ensure that you come home safe at the end of the shift. RTF also donates a portion of select sales back to supporting veteran and first responder charities. Use the discount code GRITTY15 for 15% off your personalized coaching or next order online. That's GRITTY15 at resiliencethroughfitness.com. All one word, resiliencethroughfitness.com.
We're even leaders of ourselves. You have to be the leader of you, and you're kind of dictating in a leadership manner how you're going to go throughout the day, how you're going to handle adversity. So you kind of can't shy away from those principles, at least. And even if you don't want to be quote unquote leader, you have to get familiar with those principles and try to become a better leader, quote unquote, because you have to lead yourself.
The power of narrative, and I suppose like walk us into that.
Making sure you have this filter, this process of asking these questions. I think that's the place to start. Your first thought is not gospel truth, but a lot of people tend to think it is. Like, as soon as I have a gut reaction, or as soon as I have my first thought, it's like, that's what I'm going with. That's you reacting out of emotion. That's you reacting out of ego or fear or whatever is presenting itself at that time.
Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Blue Grit Radio. This is your host, Eric. Today I'm joined by a returning guest. He joined us in episode 70, that's 70, and that was how to be the hero of your own story. And so today I'm excited to bring back Luke, aka LS Goozdich Luke. Thanks for coming back on the show, man.
Hey, thanks for having me. This was a really fun conversation the first time. I remember sending it to like everyone that I knew because I was like, I think this was a good conversation. You asked really good questions. You come from a really great background. There's not enough podcasts in the police world, I don't think, that do it the way you do it. And so I was happy to like be a part of that and support that from my angle and show it to my audience, because I think what you're doing is fantastic. And I was really happy with our conversation. So I appreciate you bringing me back.
No, thanks so much, man. I mean, it's been cool. I've shared a couple times in this project to meet people and really connect, and we're on opposite coasts. And so that alone, it's just very, very unique and very special to be able to connect with someone that resonates in such a similar way on some of these themes, right? And so for those that are unaware, and I'll ask you to do a quick intro to for yourself, but for those unaware, Luke, I found his content essentially because he's a fiction writer. But focusing on these themes of adventure and the hero's journey and masculinity in all the classical positive ways. And so I really loved that, and then come to learn that he is a mental health counselor and he shares his own story and adversity. And so that's really the cross section of where we all as humans, as people, but specifically men, and the unique challenges that may come with that in today's age, whether it's first responders or not. I mean, that's something that I've grappled with and reflected on and continue to try to build myself and elevate these conversations, in my life now, as I'm a father and a leader in my workplace, and you're a father of two, and all that. So, no, I really nerded out for sure. And then it was also a conversation that there's a handful of them in this project, like Blue Grit Radio, where I'm like, man, I felt really good. Like I felt really accomplished in the ideas shared in the discourse, how much I learned, but then nerding out on the fact that I know a lot of listeners did as well, and just providing that positive conversation and insight, because we just need more of it.
Right. Yeah. Anytime you can get more kind of like yourself being a role model, whether you see yourself as that or not, like getting these role models in a room together, talking and being able to share your voice, share your experiences. That's only ever constructive. That's only ever helpful in the way you're doing it. So I'm with you. The fact that you have this put together, I think it's great for your community and beyond, right? Like I'm not in law enforcement, but the conversations that you put out, they help me too, and like the leadership aspects and what can I take away from the human point of view. To your point, I'm not in the same field, but I'm still taking away so many lessons because we all do grapple with the same types of things, just in different arenas.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. A big thing for me that I've been kind of riffing on and playing on is the fact that leadership starts with ownership, and everyone is a leader. And I'd like to remind guys in policing, it's like some people shy away from the leader title, or the leader, I suppose label might be a better word. But no, like in first responder work, when you show up, people are all looking to you for some sort of still and some sort of order in the chaos. And so, even amongst your peers, and that's one of the most powerful versions of leadership, like at the peer level, but certainly for everyone, for those parents, like, yeah, you're absolute leaders in your family unit. But then I also like to remind people and nudge them that no, you are a leader in all the respects of your life and your day to day, how you carry yourself, how you interact with people, and that connection back to service. And I think that that's where I really appreciate your background in mental health and like providing service to others. Because recently, and I shared a little bit about this, but uh, I actually put pen to paper on my personal constitution, and it was a project and kind of a task that had been nagging at me for quite a while, ever since I got reminded of the impact and potential uh, development piece of that. But I was putting it off because I was kind of scared to boil it down to these
Right.
iconic or kind of thematic things for myself, even though I think about it a lot. But just to put pen to paper and take ownership of that. And so I bring that up just to say that everyone has that in whatever walk they do. But for me, theme of service just kept coming up. Whether I do this job or not, whether I have this title or not, for me, it's service, and I see that very much in you too. And that's where I think that I've really appreciated our connection and being able to collaborate on some of these things.
Yeah. And to your point of the leadership, I think that's really well said that maybe people want to shy away from getting that role or that title, but we're even leaders like of ourselves. You have to be the leader of you, and you're kind of dictating in a leadership manner how you're going to go throughout the day, how you're going to handle adversity. So you kind of can't shy away from those principles, at least. And even if you don't want to be quote unquote leader, you have to get familiar with those principles and try to become a better leader, quote unquote, because you have to lead yourself at the very least. And then to your point, if you have kids, you have to lead the family and things like that. So yeah, these it's an important, a very important thing is the skill of leadership. Um, and yeah, I can't say enough to thank you for what you do and putting these out, and the fact that you are putting pen to paper on your constitution, that makes me feel like I need to do that. And it does sound daunting, right? Because it's like in my head, oh, I kind of know what I stand for, I kind of know my code, but to really
Yeah.
solidify that, that's not easy. And it really probably, and you could probably speak to this, did you learn a lot from that process? Like, did you challenge some of your preconceived beliefs? Did you kind of have to get more clear? I feel like that's
Yeah.
what I would struggle with, is how wrestling with that would go.
Yeah, and that's why I say first draft, and I love the aspect. And talking to, shout out to Dr. Gino Calora. He was on a recent episode at the time of this recording, but it won't be that far back. But in any case, it's just recognizing that, yeah, you have these foundational aspects and values and virtues that should guide your intent, and we should look back at it. We should know, right? And then you can make amendments, right? And I think that that's healthy too. Like, if I wrote a personal constitution at age 20, it would absolutely be very different, but there would be a lot of overlap and a lot of carryover, certainly, even younger. And I imagine there's foundational themes that'll exist as I continue to review and potentially revise as they get older and older. And, we live a different life continually. And so we should be changing. So, just to answer your question, I mean, it was very it was rewarding, it was daunting, it was developmental for myself just to write it down and read it and ponder it and rephrase something. That's where I think in reflection of Blue Grit and even all these things I'm trying to do on social media or put out, why do I do all this? Why do I spend all the time? And it is because it is that aspect of service. It is that aspect of, being a role model. When you mentioned that earlier, I still feel a bit uncomfortable with it, but I recognize I am to people because they tell me. So that's
Right.
a little evidentiary. But at the same time, leadership I feel like it still is very much a thing where people would be very apprehensive and uncomfortable to say that they're a leader or they're a good leader. I think that that's like we're all shortchanging ourselves when we do that, because by virtue of just caring deeply about people and trying your best to develop yourself and those around you, then you are a good leader. We all have stylistic things. We all have a lot we can continually improve, but I feel like a lot of times it's uncomfortable because you don't want to take this egotistical approach. At the same time, we all know managers, bosses that are poor leaders. So I think it is that, which is to say that when you do put pen to paper, or at least when I did, it helped me focus on a lot of the things that were important to me. And, I've been talking about work quite a few times, but in my constitution, at the end of the day, I mention my profession, whatever that may be at the time, and I mention my work, but I reflect and I put out, and this is something that any day of the week, if you ask me, I'll be reminded of this, but in the moment we get lost in the noise and the shuffle, but that is my job is a part of my life. What is most important in my life is those that I'm closely bonded with, my family, first off, and then my friends, and for sure, friendships and colleagues. But I understand that our days are numbered in life, and our days are also numbered in career, and things change, and so that can't be too big of a piece of my full identity. However, the things that I carry, the values I carry in my day-to-day work, that would absolutely translate into whatever it is I do. Should I not continue in this career? I mean, we all will not continue in any career at a certain
Right.
day, and so sorry to be a little rambly.
No.
That is a growing theme and conversation point in first responder land, especially wellness, because even if you do 30, 35 years, like you got to hang it up one day. And that's really hard. That's really hard for people to grapple with the new day to day.
Yeah, no, I really, I didn't think that was rambling. I was enjoying every bit. I would get the pen and paper out if I were people listening, because that is one of the biggest points, is that identity piece. And we see this, you see it in military, or you see it in sports even. You see it in these careers where people lock their identity too closely to their
Yeah.
personality and who they are, with their, their job. And then once that's gone, it's like, what am I? Who am I? And I think it's brilliant how you said that, of putting those principles, those values, your ethics, your code of conduct as the base layer of what matters most and who you are. That's what comes with you, whether you're placing on top of that the career of law enforcement, or whether you make a switch or things happen, you have a different career. It doesn't change who you are and your principles and everything that you've laid as the groundwork. That's so important, because anything else is a shaky base that's going to be gone, and then you're going to be scrambling and you're going to say, who am I? And those kind of questions are not easy questions. Like, that's where you get deaths of despair, and you get, even if you're not going to go fully to a death of despair, you get you get really low when you don't know who you are. It's like a very dark experience, is being lost in that way and having that kind of existential pressure of who am I? So I think that's great advice, of lock that into your morals, then lock that into your code of conduct, not your job, and just use those as like guideposts or things like that to help you in your career and help you into whatever you're going to do. But as far as defining who you are, yeah, it cannot be your career. That's super important. So I just want to also harp on that as well.
Yeah, you explain it so well, and it reminds me because I did listen to our conversation within the last few weeks and revisit it, and that's where I can be confident that I really enjoyed it, because I didn't hate the things I was saying and how I was saying them. You certainly brought so much value, and one of the things that you did talk about, and so people that haven't listened to episode 70, please do that, because you talk about identity and loss of identity, and you shared some of your story where as a young man, you put so much identity in your relationship, and you use that as a classic, or maybe a common example of these these shifts in our lives are oftentimes when we're very susceptible to the creep of depression or that hardship. It just hits us so much harder when you're in this transition stage. And so, kind of coming up, becoming an adult, maybe going off to college, school, these moves, these significant life changes, we're susceptible, right? So retirement absolutely is one for anybody, right? Your kids moving out of the house. I mean, that's a classic one. A lot of people know, maybe their own parents, maybe their own mom, certainly someone in their life has experienced that empty nest thing, right?
Right.
That loss of purpose, and that, kind of, you just picture, parents kind of like wringing their hands, like walking around in circles, worrying about their adult kids, and like, I guess I could clean the room again, leave it everything exactly as it was, and when are you going to come back for dinner? Because they're real things, and we put so much stock. And so it's not to say any of this is not significant, but it's to say, for me, one piece, going back to your earlier question, was recognizing that, service and legacy and how I make people feel is a theme I intend to carry. It's a thing that significantly permeates when I look back through my life. Even the example of someone's career advancement in my field, like as a cop and an officer, you're interacting with so many people. You get to put hands on things. You get to go to the call and take a report and dig leads and physically put the handcuffs on people that are victimizing others. Like, that's very satisfying and rewarding. And then you promote, and you do a whole lot less of that. And then you may go to some scenes, you may help out, you may, take some cases here and there as a first line or like a sergeant. But, a lot of your role is to make sure your people are safe and they're following sound practice, so their cases are legit and stable. And then you're looking at their welfare, right? And my recent, about a year ago, I promoted again. And we're at the most important thing to me now is just taking care of the people that I work with, but I have so much less touch with them. And so it is a grappling point where, reflecting on that lesson that you shared in our first conversation, it makes so much sense in retrospect. And I wish I would have listened to it soon after my promotion, because I did have this, man, like, am I coming off the right way, or did I promote too early? Because I'm not like with the guys, and like, am I really that helpful at this administrative role, and oversight and trying to guide policy or trying to build these wellness programs? Like, does it even matter? Or would people just appreciate it more if I was just driving around? And so it is to balance. But my reflection point is just that it was a challenge, and it was kind of that inner chatter of, man, am I going the right way? Because there was so much that was different.
Right. Yeah, that's one I haven't really thought about, is kind of like changing within the same career, but obviously the culture of who you're around, or I guess the ecosystem of who you're around, is definitely different, and that that's almost an identity shift in and of itself. I haven't really thought of that, so that's something interesting. I'd probably like to research into that more, and how that goes, because that's got to be uniquely challenging to be still a part of it, right? Moving, and having a different set of, I don't know, the people you're rubbing elbows with constantly, and like the different conversations and the different way, as you said, your role plays out. Not only for you, that challenging, but I imagine, like you're almost probably going to lose a certain amount of closeness with those individuals you said you were working with, more closely, as someone else takes over that role and they're spending all that time together. So that's yeah, I definitely feel for you there. That seems like a challenging type of role, that I
Yeah,
haven't thought
yeah,
about.
and it's just different. And I think uh, strong examples, or these iconic examples that we can quickly find and potentially resonate with, are, organizational leaders. Military probably being one of the more significant ones that a lot of us can see, like, iconically, where, there's current and past military leaders that have written about leadership, maybe lessons from the battlefield or just lessons from operations. And a lot of the things are very classically simple, right? Like, find ways to inject interaction with, the troops, so that you stay connected enough, and then they see that you're making the effort. And I've seen that work, right? And I've seen too the opposite, where people feel dejected, they feel distant, and so they don't try because it's uncomfortable. It feels, it feels really
Yeah.
vulnerable to show up and have everyone just stare at you because you're the boss, um,
Right.
and that whole dynamic. And so it is to say that the principles are simple. When we read them, when we hear them, when we hear these stories, they make a lot of sense. But putting it into practice in practical terms and balancing all these objectives is where it gets a little bit more muddled. And I know, like, I'm no expert, and that's why I do geek out on this, because I'm trying to learn as much as I can and have it work for me and my culture. However, yeah, there are these aspects in leadership too. Like, you can't please them all, and that's
Right.
where your constitution is helpful. There's a guy who's looking at promotion, and he asked a really, really good question, which is not so much like, how do I prepare for the process? He's like, should everything go well, like, what advice do you have for me starting the new role and with new people looking to him and having like a literally different job? I'm like, hey man, like, I would, all the thing, this will help you in your process too, in the test itself and interviews, but like, remind yourself and write down, take notes on, like, what are you about in this job, like, big picture, like, what really, really matters to you, and then what really matters to how you interact with your people, and that will carry you. Like, maybe even visit that every 6 months or a year, like, look at those things. And I kind of shared that personal constitution idea, and I was like, well, that certainly will prepare you, because decisions are hard and you're not going to make people happy. Oftentimes you make people really upset. But if you know that it resonates with your intent, and you know why you're doing it, right? Your North Star is there, then you can feel better assured about the process.
Right. Yeah, and just to the point of you kind of being able to be stuck with you for life, and that's the only person that you're with 24 hours out of the day, 7 days out of the week. You have to look in the mirror at the end of the day and say, did I do what I was supposed to? Did I live up to that constitution? Am I living up to the ideals I'm trying to set for myself? And if you can do that, and you have something objective, even better, just to line up and say, I'm doing my best here. I think that would be helpful, because I imagine, to your point of can't please everybody, you're going to have some people who start the rumor mill, or like don't like you, and they start to talk bad about you, and you can't really do anything about that, because all you can control is you,
Yeah.
and being sure that that you're still in line with your values, whether it's in the position you were in before or this new promotion. If I can say, hey, I've I've got this evidence for at least myself to look myself in the mirror, sleep better at night, and say I've done what I need to do, then I can't really control everybody else. And I know that's tough for me too. I want to make everybody happy, people pleaser type of thing. Like if I
Hmm.
get on someone's bad side, it's like I want to talk with them and kind of explain myself, but it's not really. That's a lot of wasted energy, and a lot of that's like not about you at that point. So
Yeah.
um,
It is the inner critic, right? And that's
right,
where this conversation that we do have, I mean, we're not just geeking out on these tangents here, but it all directly plays into what Luke and I were planning to talk about. We bounced a ton of ideas since we last recorded, but in higher frequency the last few weeks. I was like, hey, what about this? You're like, yeah, I'm down. I was like, hey, how about this? You're like, yeah, I'm down. I'm down for it at all. You even talked about like watching End of Watch and breaking down like the,
right,
with your writer and mental health perspective, and then my industry professional perspective, and just kind of having a fun chatter about that after recently watching it. But that may come later. But all to say, uh, one thing we're going to talk about and you're going to share and teach us about is the power of narrative. That does connect with our last episode, but specifically, the tangent, or the relations are so huge in the things we're talking about right this moment, right? This inner noise, this inner critic, and this wanting to people please. What narratives are we accepting? I recently just had an article about that, with the premise of people asking themselves whether they should promote or not. And a lot of that I put back through the filter of, if you say no, what are those reasons? And are you just adopting and accepting these narratives, right? Oh, people won't like me if I promote. Okay, is that valid? Oh, it's going to be bad for your home life, or I don't play the good old boy game political system, so I'm just bowing out. Okay, is it actually true? Does it actually work that way? And do you not play games because you care about what people think? Like, essentially trying to invite people to run it through this filter to find out objectively if they're telling themselves the right story, if they're living the right story, right? And so with that, can you tell us a little bit about the power of narrative and I suppose like walk us into that?
Yeah, and I think segueing off perfectly what you said of making sure you have this filter, this process of asking these questions, I think that's the place to start. Um, Kind of a thing I bring up a lot in the work I do with mental health is that your first thought is not gospel truth, but a lot of people tend to think it is. Like, as soon as I have a gut reaction, or as soon as I have my first thought, it's like that's what I'm going with. But it's often that's you reacting out of emotion, that's you reacting out of ego or fear or whatever is presenting itself at that time. And without the stop, slow down, think about it, ask these questions, and have that process, then you might not get to the truth. You might just get to your initial reaction, which is the first when you and I were discussing in this past week or so about what we would talk about. You asked about patterns that I see in mental health. One of them is definitely this idea of only thinking one step ahead, and that's where you get those emotional reactions, that first thought. And I see this a lot, and I try to help people understand that you have to, if you just think one step at a time all the time, you're just reacting off emotion. It's very similar to living day by day, and doing kind of oh, I like this right now, that sounds good, this sounds fun. And if you use like a nutrition or fitness example, if you do that and you're like, oh, these chips look great, awesome, this dessert, I want that, and you just go with the initial reaction, you're going to end up a lot less healthy than if you
Mhm.
thought a few steps ahead of, okay, well, I'm aging. For me, I've got like these medical conditions I have to think about, and if I put more thought into, okay, what are the right foods that are going to help me last a little bit longer, that are going to give me more energy so I can work out. If you start thinking ahead, then you plan for a better life, you plan for a better future. And so, the first pattern I see a lot is that idea of not thinking a few steps ahead, just going off that guttural reaction, the initial reaction. And to be devil's advocate real fast, I do know, especially in law enforcement, there's not always room for this. They're like, oh, let me just think 5 steps ahead real quick. Sometimes it
Mhm.
is split decision, but this is not what I'm talking about. I'm saying in
Yeah.
those moments of quiet reflection and like when it's time to think. Of course, it's not in the middle of a crisis that you're going to think 5 steps ahead. So I do want to lay that out there. There's a time for this and a time to be split decision.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you brought that up because a lot of the conversations are like trying to tie them back into how first responders can apply that. So I mean, just to riff off that,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we make these instinctual decisions split second at times. But the times we make those really good decisions are when we pre-work, we do the pre-planning
Mm-hmm.
and training your brain and actually walking through that, like imagining these contingencies when you're in the break room or when you're in roll call, when you're in briefing, when you're unfortunately sometimes like in the middle of the night, you think of all these things.
Right.
But put a positive spin on it, recognize that that is you planning your best approach so that you don't have to wonder and start to try to come up with these contingencies as you're in the moment. It's like, no, that's how it becomes instinct, through planning and training. uh, but yeah, the habitual practice of just recognizing, again, this ties in with, call it your personal constitution, or where you want your life to be. Like, does this play into that? Does this feed to that? Because the next step, and I haven't done this. I don't know when I will, and not because I think it's morbid, just because it's I still got to work on my constitution more. But to write your obituary, and they should align, right? They should make sense together. Your constitution, what you're all about, and then obituary, whether that's tomorrow or 20 years from now or 40 years from now, what is said about you, what resonates with people that you want to be true. Are you are you living out your constitution to make that happen, right? So the simple version of the instant gratification of chips or the couch or binge watching something, rather than doing some push-ups, getting a jog in, and making some boneless, skinless chicken thighs, because those are way more delicious than chicken breasts. But those things, does it pay into who you want to be and how you want those things to serve your life?
Right. Yeah. And as you're talking about that with the nutrition example, I'm thinking too in like personal life, how many times have I just instinctually reacted? Um, I'm mad. My wife says something made me mad. Let me get mad back and say something that's like defensive instead
Hmm.
of thinking a few steps ahead and then having a way better approach. Sometimes you just, yeah, you gotta, in every aspect of life, this can apply of like, stop, think for a second, what's a better option? What happens if I do this? Well, then if I do A, what's B, C, and D look like? Um, yeah, that's just making me think, yeah, this could apply everywhere. And I want
Yeah.
to your point, when you just bring up like the obituary stuff, I think about how I want to be remembered. And that's often where I go is like, how am I treating people day to day? Because sometimes I am tired. Sometimes I'm crankier than I want to be, or sometimes I'm more irritable. And that's my trap that I fall into is like, I'll snap real fast. I'll be like, just give like a snappy answer, like, I don't have time to talk, that kind of thing. It's like, well,
Hmm.
when you're gone, is that really how you want to be remembered? Of like, oh, he was always like really busy and would not like it if you talk to him. That's not really the legacy I want to leave. So, to your point, you got to think, long lasting, longer than just today, longer than what you're feeling right now. Of like, what would feel good is if you just left me alone, I can get this done. That's not really the best option for who you want to be in the end. So,
Yeah.
yeah, good reminder to me as well for not just like nutrition and health, but in relationships. I want to reach out to people more. It's like you want to be known as someone who cared about others and was and always looking for the best for others. I feel like I don't reach out to people enough. I don't send that random text with no reason, checking in on people. Those are things I want to do more of, and it's to your point, it's the pre-planning. It's you could think of it negatively, like, oh, I'm just giving myself all this self-guilt. And maybe it is. And maybe there's a balance and you have to find a healthy way to do this. But I think this is all good information. These are good things to do to get you closer to your North Star, to your personal constitution of who you really want to be.
Yeah. Yeah, man, and I see you as such a role model and a peer and a teacher for me in these respects because I know you think about legacy a lot, right? You've hinted at it, but in our earlier conversation, you share about how I mean it's in like it's in your books too, right? Like you were given this, doctors wrote you off. You were
Mm-hmm.
pre-birth, not expected or I suppose predicted to survive like as a viable baby. And here you are, right, grown man with a family. Yeah, and you have medical challenges, and it's scary from out here, right? So I can only imagine. But I think that when you're at least for me, and we are, time zones apart. We've never actually met or sat down for coffee or anything, but when I think about legacy, a lot of my life is because of some close calls at work where I felt like one specific one, I felt like every day now is bonus time. So like,
Right.
let's go. Um, but I lose sight of that at times. I have to remind myself, and sometimes it doesn't happen until like later the week or a couple weeks from then. I was like, man, like I'm on bonus time. What am I so
Right.
preoccupied about? You mentioned being busy, and are you familiar with Oliver Berkman? I've been looking at his
I
content, and
This sounds vaguely familiar, but I'm not familiar enough with
yeah, he's
the
basically a
work.
British professor, so the most credible kind, right? Especially when you listen
Right.
to his interviews and audiobooks. But it's the to summarize, it's about time management, but less about getting more done because the argument and the premise is like we're so quote unquote busy, but it's not meaningful. Is That's kind of my spin on it. A million emails at work, but is it productive? And so this busy work trap, and it,
Right.
it falls into all aspects of our life. And um, so that's a tie in there, right? Like we're busy, but are we living with purpose and meaning? And are we making those little interactions, like you mentioned, texting a friend when they pop in your mind? That comes from such a genuine, like fantastic, loving place. Why not just send the text or make the call? For me, sometimes it's I put something in my phone. I'm going to call this person because I'll be on the road. And yeah, I know how that can feel. Hey, you're on the road, you're calling me again. But hey, like, I don't know when else they would happen in the next couple days. So let's just do it. Or I'll try. And it's a nod that you're on someone's on your mind. But at the same time, so much thought about legacy, with my buddy Diego dying at a young age, right? And so you think about how the impact that he left. And for me personally, it's like looking back and I get His otherwise stupid Facebook reminders of like memes that he sent me, like, Facebook flashback. What value does it have? But it has so much value because it's like this
Right.
little reminder of the relational little prod where you just send me, this little meme. And it's like, because in that moment when he read that or he looked at that, he thought about the stuff that he would clown me about, or the things
Yeah.
that we would enjoy together. And so, what a gift if you flip it that way. So, um, yeah, man, I thought about a couple different things as you're sharing that, but I also wanted to give the listeners more context if they're unfamiliar because they haven't listened to prior episodes. Like, this is
Yeah.
some of the filter that you come with.
Right. Yeah, definitely. For the quick of it, I had less than 1% chance of survival based on heart condition. And after some surgeries and things like that, pretty cleared up. But around 2019, I got clots in my heart, lung, and legs. And then all those effects that I never, because once I got those surgeries as a kid, I basically didn't see any issues. I boxed and had no problems. And I was like, heart condition, they fixed it. I don't know. And then in 2019, after those clots, I started to see the residual effects. And since then, I've, been put on crazy blood thinners. I've got stents in my heart. I've got liver disease. It's called Fontaine-induced liver disease. So that's like a liver disease from my heart condition. And liver and heart failure are both like inevitable, is what my doctor said. So I do have effects all of a sudden that were thrown on me around 2019. I was like, okay, it's a lot to grapple with. And so yeah, that's the lens that I'm coming from with some of these aspects, and that's why I do think about legacy a lot. That's why I do think about service. To your point of that being a key theme, is if I don't have that much time, who knows? Being optimistic, not trying to say I don't have much time, but if I don't have as much as I would maybe like, I don't think anybody has as much time as they'd like. Maybe I should focus on not just me and what I can do, but what impact I can have. Who can I touch? Because that's kind of the philosophy I've been taking on more and more lately, is that, especially even as me as a writer, I can write so many books, right? But if I can get someone else to write their book and inspire them to do that, and I can inspire this guy to write his book, and I can help this person and this person, then I'm essentially building out this empire of legacy for me, where it's like I helped all these individuals achieve what I think is their potential. That's super important to me. And that's why I'm in the mental health field as well. It's just that idea of helping people realize who that without, this is a Rocky quote that I love. It's until you start believing in yourself, you're not going to have a life. It's essentially, that is one of my guiding principles. It's like, I want people to believe in themselves and to see that they have a purpose, they have a meaning, they have a why, and that it might take a lot of hard work and it might not be pretty, but I need them to see that and find it worth it in themselves to take on that journey. Because to me, seeing other people achieve it is just as good as seeing myself like write a book. If I see someone else, who was struggling with confidence, go out there and finish their book and get it out there, that's just as meaningful to me. So I'm really into building other people and their belief and their confidence in themselves.
Yeah, I love that, man. I see it for sure. And that is the legacy and impact, right? And
Yeah.
it's mentorship. That's what it is, right? And so, I mean, so many times I've reflected on Diego and how it creates this like kind of ripples, or more like a shockwave of this positivity and this beacon of like just goofiness, but also service, and like how he cared about all the things that I really didn't. I care. Like, I cared about like community relations. I just wasn't the one that wanted to do any of it.
Right.
I cared about, putting on classes or giving presentations, as long as someone else is doing it. Like, that's cool. Like, I don't want to be there. But because of his example, I was like, man, there's so much power here, and I need to get outside of my comfort zone, and I need to do some of this. And I think, to your point, right? Like, I did the arrest, and a lot of that was really fun for a while, and then it got to a point where I felt, and I believed, and in retrospect, I believe that at a certain point, Sergeant was the right role, because now I could affect and curb other people to help them with their process, help them with their development, keeping them safe, keeping them mentally safe, right? Because I had specific insights and passion therein. Um, and one thing I do want to touch on, when you shared some of these narratives, one that we've been kind of dipping in and out of, but covering this only thinking one step ahead,
Yeah.
it actually made me think about, this negative self-talk. We brought that up a little bit earlier because I was talking to a guy that, and a lot of these really good conversations, or these really meaningful kind of conversations that I think of as like a quote unquote experienced supervisor. A lot of it I see, you see yourself in others, and then that's where you can help them the best, is you're helping like a younger version of yourself. But
Right.
like beating yourself up so much. But I actually talked to this guy, and I could really relate to his frustration of like a work performance thing. And sometimes the cards aren't aligning in the right ways for you, even though you're putting in all the effort. Um, all to say that I invited him and I asked him, I was like, hey, think about like where you're going to be like 2 years from now, thinking back to this moment. Like, can you recognize that there is some value in self critique? Maybe think about like filling up a pint glass. It's like, and anything beyond that, which you're already far beyond, is you're just pouring it on. It's just going everywhere, right? You're pouring like a gallon of water into a pint glass, whereas like I think that getting a little bit of a chip on your shoulder, a little bit of that hunger, that drive, that like, hey, no, I'm going to go back to the drawing board. Like that pint glass it's plenty enough, right?
Yeah.
And he appreciated that, right? And I can think of examples like that where, I mean, that's the conversation I needed, and the conversation I still need, and right. So it's thinking that's just maybe that's where my mind went when you shared that phrase or that idea in line with all this stuff, because ultimately, yeah, you're not going to make everyone happy. You can't control everything. You can control what you do to an extent. You can control what you think to an extent, even as you actively realize all these other thoughts like shooting in your brain that you want nothing to do with. Um, but you just got to do your best, and you got to run your lap.
Yeah. And intentionality and awareness are like really the two big ones that come to my head as far as starting points for how to counteract some of these things. To your point of the negative self-talk or only thinking one step ahead or any of these patterns, if you have the awareness of it, that's a great place to start. But you also have the intentionality to do something different. Awareness is not going to get you far enough if you just know, oh, I have this tendency to think negatively in this way. Okay, you know that, but what are you going to do to change it, or how are you going to challenge it? So having that intention too, and being able to see a stop sign in your head almost when you start to get in that pattern, so that you can stop and really think about how you want to handle it instead. That's my kid crying. If you
Yeah,
hear that,
yeah. Do you got to go?
no, my wife's down there, so we
All
should be
right.
good.
Thank you, wifey.
Yes.
No, I feel that. And this is maybe the best transition. What you just said, I think, resonates with the other point that you shared, which is that the past dictates the future, and that narrative or that thought pattern.
Right. Yeah, that's another big one I see is and it really shuts people down from wanting to try or even have the conversations that we're talking about, or even critique themselves, and get a little negative criticism. Like it's this idea that, no, that hasn't worked in the past, so I'm not going to try that. Or no, I've always, it's the always never. It's the black and white thinking of, every time I talk to this guy, it goes like this, so it's not worth it. Or you know when I did that before, it didn't work. It was a waste of my time. So I'm not going to try that again. It's these types of patterns and cycles that keep people from growth, or from realizing that instead it's not the past dictates the future. Sure, the past informs it, but you can come with a new approach. You're growing all the time. You said that earlier in the podcast. I like, if you had a constitution now, it might be a little bit different when you're, um, you know, 15 years down the line. So I think it's important to realize that, okay, because something happened in the past this way doesn't mean it's always going to happen that same way, because you're not the same person. They're not the same person. The situation's always going to be different in some way. And you coming at it, you are going to be different in some way. And to give yourself that ability to try again, or give yourself a chance to see that from a different angle. If you shut that down too quickly, then you're really robbing yourself of good experiences, good growth.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes me think about how, I mean, it ties in with like victim mentality, right? And it, I see a lot of times, and it seems like a lot of times when you're in it, you don't realize it. But then it's even worse when I've worked with people that are like, yeah, I know it's a victim mindset, but, and they kind of stick
Right.
to it, right? And I'm like, and sometimes I can think of one specific one where it was like that person. knew and could tell you like after the fact, yeah, I keep self-sabotaging. And it's
Yeah.
so hard. Like how do you grapple with that?
Right. I mean, that's where you're stopping at awareness. It's like, yeah, I know. And that's not enough. It's awareness. And then
Yeah.
you have to look at the belief. Like, we got the awareness. Okay, so what is the belief then? What? Tell me. And then C, the ABC would be awareness. B would be, what's the belief? What are you thinking about here? And then C would be challenge it. Um, what can we? How can we challenge this? How can we come up with a more rational response to this? That's because what you're having there at B is most likely what we talked about with the first thought. It's not correct. It's a little bit irrational. It's self-sabotage. It's victim mentality. Whatever it is, challenge it and be willing to sit there and say, okay, play devil's advocate. Maybe it's not that. Maybe it's this, and at least try. I think, and this is why narratives matter so much. Either you have in your head like the story that, okay, this is not going to play out any other way. This is always going to be like this, and that's just how I see it. That is so closed off as compared to if you had the narrative in your head that I had a bad experience with this in the past. I really need to adjust my approach. I really need to maybe get some mentorship and talk about how I could approach this differently before I go back. This is not going to be easy, but I'm going to give it another shot. Like those two narratives in your head, take those two down the road. One person is going to grow. They're going to connect. They're going to synergize more. They're going to have a better time, most likely, than the person who's like, no, I'm shutting that possibility off and I'm not doing that again. And then they shrink, their opportunities shrink, their world shrinks, and their beliefs become more and more rigid, and it becomes harder and harder to break out of those patterns.
Yeah. I don't imagine a lot of people listening are predisposed towards this victim mentality, but we do have it. Like I can think of plenty of times where I was like, woe is me. And sometimes I feel it in the moment. I'm like, "Ah, stop. Like, no, it's
Right.
woe is not you. But also maybe it is a few weeks back where you're like, man, I really was trying to start a pity party, and maybe you're a little embarrassed, maybe ashamed of it. Like, are there any things that you would recommend people for listeners to look out for, or maybe practice that would help them identify if they're starting in this negative feedback loop, and then how to break out of that?
Yeah, I think one of the things is noticing, kind of being aware of your mental headspace and having a check-in time, whether that's morning or night. Those are the two best times. Either if you're a morning person, you're a night person, whether you want to check in with yourself then or then. I think it's good to have a checkpoint time in the day to really be like, how are things going, just between you and the person in the mirror, like full honesty. How are things going? How am I feeling? And if you can start to do that more often, then you'll notice when you start to feel off. And that's when it comes to you grab the awareness in those moments where you're doing the self-reflection at the end of the day and saying, you know what, like when I look back at today, I was like, going back to my examples, maybe I was really short with people. Maybe I was rushed and just like did not give enough time to things. What's going on? And then it's asking those questions. It's taking that pause. I always, like I've brought this up already, I always see it, and this is how my therapist brought it to me. I see these moments as stop signs. You have to see it as like this physical stop sign in your head that flashes. Like if you check in with yourself and you say things aren't good, then see that stop sign flash up. And when you see that, know that it means, okay, I've got to put a little more thought into this. I think you in military and in police, in law enforcement, you guys have like after action reports types of
Hmm.
things, right?
Yeah.
And it's similar to that. You don't have to get a pen and paper out. You don't have to make it super official, but in your head, run like a report of what's been going on. And it's not that it's pretty easy. It's a simple thing to
Hmm.
start to look through your week and be like, okay, I guess this is kind of been the theme. I've been maybe blaming others, or I've been not getting enough sleep. You can kind of identify something, but it takes you realizing that you're in this first, then looking back at it and trying to analyze and kind of get that after action report of, okay, what's been the theme, and then select that theme and you can start to work on it. That'd be my like practical implementation that I like to do. And mine's at the end of the day when I do that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
it's
I
just
like
real
that.
simple in the head. It's not written down.
Yeah. And I guess to plug the writing it down, I journal here and there, but my wife is like an avid journaler, and she has reported back like so much benefit in her own reflection. And part of that is not even in the moment. Like I think when she started, she just made a commitment that she's going to do it more mornings than not, and then it's almost every day, if not every day, in the morning. Um, and she's just I just see her there, and it's like it's just quiet morning, and I'm doing whatever I'm doing, but then she's just there on the couch with her pad. But she has shared with me that so much of her positive reflection isn't like just in the moment, but looking back and then seeing how she's worked through things and how her reflection points, these little timelines or benchmarks, are actually showing like progress in some of these things in this chatter or the things she's working on, whether it's concrete or kind of ethereal. So, just something to consider, as people kind of figure out like a process for them. There's no reason why it can't be, when you're pounding pavement out there, maybe same time every day, like it's just you and your thoughts. I would highly recommend people take a break from the tech. I know you all listen to Blue Grit Radio, but I love consuming information, podcasts. And then at one point I was just crushing through podcasts all day long in my car driving around, but also working out at like 1.5 to double speed. So think of all that info that I certainly wasn't retaining, but then also just the power of just some peace, right? Like just
Right.
taking the dog out for like 10 minutes and then leaving the phone, which may sound like terrifying to some. And that probably means that you need to do it because it's uncomfortable for me for sure. Um, but just it forces this presence, and then it forces this check in. Maybe it's just for me, sometimes it's just listening to the wind and the birds, but then other times it's like, oh, this thought keeps coming to my mind. Okay, like cool, like try to, I think like a lot of recommendations are like non-judgmentally recognize it and then think about what you ought to do about that thought, right? Is it a nagging potential action, or is it like something you need to address? But yeah, I mean, we could go a lot of different directions from there.
Yeah. The writing it down, going back to that point real quick to circle back, there's one thing that I wanted to add to that always, this was something that was kind of a selling point to me to do a little journaling and writing in that respect. I certainly don't do it every day. I do it when, um, maybe like a few times a week, things like that, when it comes up, and I feel like I have to like gather a lot of information from the week, and then I write like in bigger spurts. But either way, the reason that got me to do it was this Matthew McConaughey. Maybe it was an interview, maybe it was in his book, but he talked about how what worked for him was like after he learned that he journaled for so long that he could, if he started to feel in a low point or in a funk, he could go back to a time that he felt really good, and he could
Mm,
read about what were the positive patterns. What was I doing that was making it so good? Because then you can get yourself back there. And that was kind of a selling point to me. I was like, hey, I
that makes
need
sense.
that because yeah, when I'm down, it's really hard. You get that tunnel vision. You're like, no, everything sucks. It's always been bad. I don't know. I was delusional, I guess. But then you can see when maybe I was working out more, or maybe I was doing this or that more. You can start to identify patterns that will help you get out. So that was the first point I wanted to loop back to, is there is a benefit to writing it down so you can go back and reference.
Yeah.
So yeah, good on your wife for doing that. That is great. And the more you can do that, the more data you have on yourself. And when is more data ever bad in any situation?
Yeah.
Um,
That's fantastic. I think the carryovers are, meant for people early in their career, like write about your why, right? This can go back to personal constitution stuff, but like write about like what you're so jazzed about, what you're so excited about, because ultimately we we will always flirt with or delve into cynicism in whatever it is, right? And you lose
right,
that grind. But for me, like certain times working with people that were excited, like kind of reinvigorated that in me as a mentor, but also same mentorship, but in hiring and recruiting, when I was meeting all these people that just wanted so badly to serve in this way, and meanwhile, in my own ranks, like everyone's like, "Who the f would want to do this job?" Like, no one likes, And I'm not disparaging them. Like, it was a narrative, and I felt it too. And I was like, "You're right. Who would?" Oh
right.
crap! There's people here. Let's work with them. Let's see what we got. But it can really reignite that fire, and I could totally see it in yourself. I've reflected on, yeah, as I even said today in this recording, like high on life. Like after my shooting incident, it was all bonus time. And a couple years down the line, life happens, and then you have a kid and you're exhausted. And I was just like, man, my life sucks. And like, I feel so ashamed to say it, and I felt ashamed saying it or feeling it in the moment. But I mean, I'd have to believe that if I had written down some of my thoughts and reflections back when, to include my frequent thoughts and reflection about how bad I wanted to be a dad and how bad I wanted, us to be able to build a family because we had some adversity there.
Right.
It would have just snapped me back, I think, into reality rather than I've only barely mentioned this or admitted this a couple times, but I at one point was like, I need another like close call. I need to get back there, right? And
Hmm.
I can see how, and I've talked to some folks or kind of bounced this idea where I can see where we have this risk-seeking behavior because we want that dopamine, that endorphin spike, just to feel so, sharp and alive again. Because the monotony of the grind, that is common with first responder work, is it just kind of dulls the senses.
Yeah.
And you're around all this negativity. And so, all to say, there are other ways rather than like getting in some high speed, like
Right.
close call pursuit. Or some like really crazy incident. No, I mean that may or may not happen, but we can utilize healthy coping and healthy practices like
Yeah.
reflection, like focusing on the moment, being present, being with the loved ones that we have.
Yeah. And it goes back to what you can control. You can control if you have this log and journal on yourself that you can turn back to. You're not going to know when there's going to be an event like that at work that's going to put you in that situation. You can't control that, but you definitely can control if you're going to, write down your why and return to it when you're feeling down. That's something that you can do. So it's always important to remember, what am I wishing for? What am I hoping for? But what can I actually practically implement too? Because if you get caught too much in like waiting for something or waiting for someone, you know, that's not a great strategy. It's not a winning strategy to do that. You
Yeah.
got to implement things for yourself, even if they're not perfect. They're something, and starting with what you have, and maybe you're like, I didn't journal in time. Well, it's okay. You start now. There's no pressure to like go back and try to remember what it was. Just start from where you're at, and that's kind of I know. I don't think we touched on this one yet, but I wanted to talk about like personalization and the superhero complex of. I think I can definitely identify with this one a lot, where it's so much pressure we put on ourselves to do everything right. And we learn this new piece of information. And it's like we're smacking ourselves in the head, like, how did I not implement this? Why wasn't I doing this? And I want to put it out there to the people of just, give yourself some grace. Remember that you are human. You're a person. This just means if you make a mistake, if you mess up, that just means you're a person, and that's completely, that's fine. What's not cool is making mistakes over and over and then never, being willing to change or hear advice. But to make a mistake or to you know go along and realize you could have been doing things better, that's everybody. And it's just about how you react and how you move forward that matters most. Um, so yeah, I don't know if you wanted to touch on that a little bit of like the superhero complex. I imagine that takes on a whole new level with law enforcement that probably you could speak to a lot better than I can. But I know every person out there, I think, can identify with putting pressure on themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you brought up the perfect time. I had it on the tip of my tongue, like if you didn't go there, because yeah, you had outlining these main three to me, and they absolutely intersect. I think when we think about it, right, we were
Hmm.
just talking about like, hey, like take some pause, journal, reflect. And so someone's like, well, that's something I don't do now. So it's pressure, right? And earlier we were talking about busy work and how we have this sense of, in some ways, pride, but also obligation of just being busy, busy, busy. And we just need to be more intentional, right? And so the personalization, the superhero complex, absolutely does, because at sometimes you are lauded as a hero, and sometimes you realize that you and your peers are in positions to do heroic things, and so I think with that comes um, some imposter syndrome sometimes, or even like some moral injury. I mean, there's a lot of terms that I could just throw in, but also would show how complicated this gets, because there are times where we don't feel heroic and people are looking to us and we don't have answers, and our hands are tied. We want so badly to do something and we can't, and we feel actually ineffective to useless. right? That's hard. That's frustrating. At the same time, we can feel so productive and uh, like dialed in and appreciated at work, and then we go home and we're elevated. So one, we're not even coming home in the best state to adapt to family, but because we literally were dealing with some life and death things in the week, when we come back home and we're dealing with issues with parenting, or maybe it's the career of your spouse or partner, and it's not literally life and death, then it feels, whether or not we recognize it, it feels less so, right? And that these are kind of some categorical trends that you see in first responder families. um, and I think that it does play off of this superhero complex, because man, at work I feel like a hero. Like literally the boss is telling me thank you for working extra hours and making my buddies safer, and I have tangible proof that this is valued because my paycheck's higher. Like you have all these things, and the dopamine response is high when you get in that chase and you arrest someone, you tackle them, and then you go home, and then it seems like at times the more effective you're at work, it's all the attributes and things that would make you more ineffective at home, right? And I know that that's oversimplification, but we've all experienced that. And so that can be a lot to grapple with when you're trying to do more, more, more. And for first responders, for shift work, it is challenging to have that balance, or that illusion of balance. It's certainly challenging for anyone with competing things, right?
Right.
You have your own medical stuff, and you have a business, you're a writer, you're a freelancer, and but then also you have your practice, you have your clients. Um, the emotional impact of that, trying to show up for them, but not letting it overburden you, because then you have less bandwidth to give to yourself, to your family. Um, yeah, all these things combined. Even earlier
Yeah.
we were talking about before the recording. You're like, man, I'm working out 3 times a week. I'd love to do 5.
Hmm.
I'm like, yeah, like that's just another example where like you're bummed you're not quote unquote doing it all. But I mean, just like life, we talked about the Constitution, like life changes and circumstance changes. So doing your best looks different as your inputs, as your environment changes. I think just recognizing that, right? Just like when we said, just kind of being present, taking inventory, and being patient, giving grace, like all these things can be helpful to, you know, thinking about the past dictating the future, or how to stay constructive rather than, a victim mindset. Like that's absolutely the same things that I would think about and suggest people think about for the superhero complex.
Yeah. Yeah. That was all really well said. Yeah.
Thank you.
For one, I can't imagine the stark difference of going from like a law enforcement day to day and then coming home, especially if it was like an eventful day for you and then just coming home. Because you know, the most action I would get is I work with a group. I do group therapy sometimes with kids on the autism spectrum, and sometimes there's like kids will almost fight. They'll be standing up, and it's like, oh, we gotta like handle this. Something so minuscule compared to like what law enforcement would do as far as life or death. It's not life or death, but it's just like slightly um activating, I guess. And then I come home and it's like, huh, I'm tired, and it's like, look, you don't know what I've been dealing with, but I can't imagine. So I definitely have huge empathy for law enforcement, where it's like these are two different worlds you're going into, two completely different worlds that you have to balance. So um, I think the advice you gave is so good, because there aren't any clear, easy answers of this is how you do it, and this is how you fix it, and this is how it's better. It's not. It's like you have to get a healthy understanding of what is possible, what is realistic, and how to manage what you like, manage the unmanageable, and be okay with um to your point of like the 3 or 5 times of working out. Like I can either do that in a very unhealthy manner and beat myself up and say, why aren't you doing more, and really take it negatively, or I can go to your well-adjusted approach of like realizing that times ebb and flow, and responsibilities ebb and flow, and life is going to look different depending on the angle you look at it, and the day you're looking at it, and your current circumstance. So, uh, all of that to say that it really does come down to that moment of pause. And these are all connected, of just like being able to just not instantly react or go with momentum, since momentum is such a powerful force. Like, don't let momentum knock you down and drag you into some of these negative mindsets. Really use momentum to your benefit by slowing down, pausing, grappling for control over your own thoughts, because it's easy for those to take off away from you. Grapple with that and bring it back, and then momentum can actually work in your favor. I could, once I get to that place where I'm working out 5 times a week, you've been there where it's like, okay, this is now I'm doing it, and 5 times a week seems easy, and it seems like, wow, well, I don't know how I was ever doing 3. That's just life.
Yeah.
That's just how it goes, and you have to be willing to take a healthy, realistic look at all this stuff and realize you can't fix it all. Go into the superhero complex or personalization. It's not always you. It's not always, oh, I could do more and this would be fixed. Not really. It's not always the case.
Yeah, and that's a great example because even in that, like, you're building up this pressure and this neurosis or this guilt of working out more or not working out more. Like, does that serve you? Like, let's say, like, one, the feeling doesn't serve you, and then two, getting in there for that fourth or fifth time where you feel like now you don't have enough time, or you're sacrificing this, or you're putting your family on the back burner. That's certainly not serving you either, right? And then
Right.
maybe even adjusting, like, me working out frequently now is just like smaller doses if I'm intentional, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm generally just personally not spending a lot of time in the gym, but I
Mm-hmm.
feel pretty good with what I'm doing most of the time. So it's just being able to adapt and be adjustable. I think one thing I do want to mention on that, uh, the superhero complex, like I
Mm-hmm.
gave that example because it's a little bit textbook, right? Like, the high achiever at work and then burned out at home, and some of
Yeah.
these some of the reward systems at work don't actually, aren't compatible with the reward systems at home or what's needed. But then, I say that because it's a classic kind of textbook thing, but it's a narrative, right? So going back to this whole conversation, like,
Right.
we got to flip that because some of the most effective cops at work are very patient. They're very compassionate, right? And so if you're standing there, and yeah, there's fatigue that comes with that, but that's a different topic, right? So, like, if you're standing there and this drunk person's just berating you for like 10 minutes and you're kind of standing there and you're waiting for them to be done because, you're like 15 feet away and you can see their hands, they're just irate. Okay, cool. Like, no sweat off, like, I'm fine. Like, I'm a professional. I'll deal with this. If we need a rest, we'll do that. If we don't, then we'll leave. Um, I mean, that patience and that compassion and that professionalism, like, that can absolutely be a skill and something that manifests fantastic relationships at home, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're letting your spouse vent and you're not trying to go into fix it mode, you're just like, no, like, he or she just wants to be heard right now. And then maybe I'll ask for permission or ask for feedback. Like, hey, are you looking for some feedback? Did you just want to vent? I mean, so many times, myself included, and other folks I know, just asking like, "Hey, are you looking for any insight, or did you just want to vent?" Like, not just don't roll your eyes. Like, you're there to listen. You're like, "Hey,
Right.
can I be a good listener?" Yeah, that's all I need. Thanks. That was
Yeah.
fantastic. Cool. I feel better. And then they walk away. You're like, okay, that's all I was needed for, right? So, like, expectations, communication, um, very much factors in our job. And so just to flip, like, recognize how that can be helpful. And with that, it's on the superhero thing. You don't have to do it all. You don't have to fix the situation right now. You just need to figure out what it is you need to do. And maybe that's just to be present. Maybe that's to
Yeah.
leave the phone over there on the other side of the room and just be plugged in for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, really well said. Yeah, you don't have to have all the answers. Certainly don't have to have them all right now. In counseling, that's something that comes up. It's like, what if someone presents you with something and you have no idea? They, in when I was in school, they'd tell you like, well, do you tell them that? Because that's the honest truth. You tell them, I
Mm,
don't know. That's a really good question. I don't know, and I would have to get back to you. And then you can go do your research. You can learn more. You can come back, but you don't have, as a young counselor, especially in school, like practicing this stuff, you feel like I have to know the answer. I gotta give them something.
mm-hmm.
I gotta just word vomit something out there until it sounds good. Maybe
Yeah.
that's not authentic. That's not going to be helpful. So
Cops
use that
too,
analogy
right?
in your
Like, it's just, you could
yeah.
think about that example where it's like, what am I under arrest for? Duh. And then you just seem incredible rather than just being like, I don't know right now. I just know you can't be out there. You can't be threatening, hitting people. I got to talk to some
Mhm.
witnesses right now. You're not free to go. That's why you're in handcuffs. I don't know
Right.
the exact statute, man, and I'll tell you, like, like so many times I think that especially cops, like you feel like you have to be like you are the book, you're the
Right.
book of laws. Uh, no, just be real with people, and a lot of times you're
Mm-hmm.
like, I don't know, like I'll actually ask my sergeant, and people respect that because you're human, and we're all
Right.
humans. Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Great
love that.
point.
Yeah, I love that you share that. I think that as a practitioner, that makes so much sense. It would really help someone trust a practitioner. I've shared about this before, but I was working with a therapist for a little bit, and in first responder culture, we so much it's like, hey, go with someone that you have to find a culturally competent first responder trauma counselor. I would say if you are trying to work through first responder specific trauma, I agree. I think that makes a lot of sense. For
Yeah.
me, I felt in this chapter of my life, I felt so just burdened with, work pressure and balancing things and showing up at home and just like not being less hard on myself. And so I was like, I just need to talk to a counselor. I just need to talk to
Right.
a therapist. And there are a couple things where I just kind of rattled off all the things, in the moment, in the prompt, where he just kind of took this pause. He's like, man, that's a lot.
Yeah.
And I wasn't there like frustrated that he didn't have the answers. I'm not expecting like a guru, I felt validated. And I was like, yeah, man, it is a lot. Like,
Right.
I actually feel less, I feel more at peace with the fact that someone else listening is like, huh, okay. And then he'd actually say like, yeah, I'm taking this pause. I'm chewing on all the things you said. I'm like, okay, yeah, it's a lot. I just kind of rattled all this stuff at you, man. Um,
Yeah.
so it's fine. And it's just, again, I think it's recognizing that we can all give grace to ourselves. We're all human. And so, yeah, I think it's fantastic how you package these three main prongs in this conversation of narrative, past these patterns, right, that aren't true. Like, so the past doesn't always have to dictate the future, and we shouldn't always be thinking one step ahead. And then also, like, we don't have to be this superhero complex. Like, we don't have to do it all. We actually
Right.
shouldn't, not just not have to. Like, we shouldn't try to
Yeah.
do it all.
It's not. It's not healthy, and it's not. To your point, it's not human. If you're just a robot that has all the answers to everything all the time, good, you're a robot, but you're not. You're a human. So if something comes up that you can't handle, that's life, and you'll work on it. Um, I love that example of the counselor just being like, that's a lot. Because sometimes people come into counseling and they're like, this person's going to fix it. They'll just tell me some stuff. Not really. We're not gurus. We're not going to be like, this is what you're going to do. Step 1, step 2, step 3. Now it's fixed. Sometimes it is, just empathy. Sometimes what my counselor does is just silence, just sit there in silence. And it's like making me think, because in
Mm,
counseling, it's all about you, and we're a mirror, and it's you figuring this thing out. So sometimes that silence is what's needed, or sometimes it's just that validation that's needed. But yeah, it's all within you. You just have to be patient with yourself and give yourself grace and give yourself time, and not put so much pressure to say, I gotta be perfect. And I say that to the audience, but I also say that to myself. This is what I'm working on currently as well. I struggle with perfectionism. I struggle with
yeah.
what my counselor calls it, like a human being or a human doing. Like, I'm only
Mm,
content if
yeah.
I'm a human doing stuff. I can't just be. So that's the stuff that I'm working on as well. It's not. I'm definitely not coming from the other side of the fence here. I'm right there with everybody.
No, me too. Me too. That's exactly why we have these conversations. And I know because, it's shared back with me, but I know it because when I see other people that I look up to, whether it's in the industry or in the mental health space or just in general in life, like people are doing things with the type of energy that resonates with me, that inspires me. When people are vulnerable, I'm like, yeah, like that's really helpful. And they share these little tips, super helpful. Um, Man, I'd be remiss. I don't want to squeeze it in, and so we're gonna have to talk about your novels a different time. But I do want to
Mm-hmm.
plug it for a couple reasons. One, they're very fun reads. But we talked about it a little bit in part one. Sorry, I just kicked my mic.
You're good.
But at the time, you're talking about Frozen Wrath, and then the second book, Retaliation Mountain, and then the third, Vipers and Red Rocks. But 3-part series, where there are law enforcement characters interwoven and criminal elements interwoven. And I remember, when you were first talking to me, you're like, "Hey, man, I'm gonna send you this book, and I hope you don't mistake it like I think cops are messed up." I'm like, dude, a lot of the best cop movies and shows have like some pretty messed up cops, right? Um, but I love, and I wanted to bring this up because in the characters, I mean, we could do a dive on kind of some of the responses to stress and narratives, but I mean, there's like this archetypical, just like badass guy, right? Hunter, right?
Right.
But there's vulnerability there, right? There's this own like self doubt and this like in this inner monologue, but then there's also this. I think one of my favorite characters in it is O'Brien because
Hmm.
he's just so human, and he's this cop that's like he's trying to do the right thing, but he's grappling with like fear and like legit like obligation and duty to family, and like, hey, you're out here, like, what's gonna happen to your family if if you try to do the brave thing and it doesn't work out?
Right.
So I just wanted to tie that in because I wanted to plug it, and I wanted to plug you a bit, but also like we talked about it in the first conversation we had, but when we look at these stories, a lot of times it can help us understand a lot of what we're going through. It can resonate better when you're looking at someone, like, a fictional figure, and in learning and watching or reading and feeling what they're going through and their thoughts and their concerns and their fears.
Yeah, that's what I've always loved about narrative and found so enriching about story is that other than, or I guess not other than, very different from something like a self-help book or a nonfiction. It's not like lessons handed to you that you highlight and you learn, you try to figure out. It's you bringing who you are to someone bringing who they are on the page for a novel. And there's kind of something that happens when you're reading it, that who you are mixes with what artistically they tried to say, and you can pull out stuff that someone else will not. Someone else cannot, and it's kind of more of a personal um, game every time you read a novel, I think, than it is a self-help book. Because if you and I read the same self-help book, we're getting the same lessons, we're getting the same facts. But if we read the same novel, we have two different lives, we have two different careers, we're going to have very different takeaways from the novel. And I love that. And I think there's such power in it because of that one step of removal too. If someone's telling me what to do in a nonfiction, I might have my own preconceived notions, right? I might have that past dictates the future thing and be like, nah, that stuff doesn't work for me, I'm not doing that. But if it's a novel and I empathize with the character and I bring myself into the story and I get so closely intertwined with the character, I'm way more apt to be like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense what he's doing there. And then you kind of take the lessons inadvertently from these characters and it feels more natural and you're more accepting of it. At least I am.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll plug another character in there, but one of the main characters, Dante.
Mm-hmm.
If I had read your books as a young adult, I could not reconcile an anti-hero, like someone that it was looking for redemption. I'd be like, you messed up, dude. You're a bad person,
Right.
right? Like, this is just my linear, like, very black and white thinking as a very young man, or an adolescent, a young adult. But man, like, as an adult, as someone that has interacted a ton with people that have made huge mistakes, and even arguably in my family, and trying to reconcile, and looking at my dad and like giving him grace and forgiving him, um before he passed, like, for a ton of mistakes, like a whole fatherhood of mistakes, but to see that he did the best he could with what he had and the framework he had, not to give excuses but to give grace.
Yeah.
But Dante, like, what a great character, because it's a redemption story, and who doesn't like that? But I was not, just to say, like, two different people watching the same story, reading the
Yeah.
same story, like, my younger me would be like, okay, let's move on past this guy.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm like rooting for him, right? Because it's an underdog of like morality in some ways, when you have that redemption component of, yeah, you can't erase the bad you did. And I got to consider that for myself too. Like, I'm certainly no saint, and I've certainly done a lot of things that I'm not proud of in life, in the job, what have you, right? But our job is to do and learn from those things and move forward, move past it. And yeah, I
Well,
think it
thank you.
does tie in with everything we're talking about.
I appreciate the compliment. I was definitely sweating bullets when I sent you those books. I was like, oh, what
Uh,
if he thinks I hate cops? This is not good. because it's very, it's exaggerated. It's a crime story. You got some very bad cops. You also have some good cops, but it's all very exaggerated. It's not my real reflection. So I think police
Yeah.
is, but I was definitely sweating when I first
No,
sent them. So
cops
I'm
love.
glad you enjoyed them.
Yeah. I mean, we love. Shoot, I say we, but very popular series and movies, right? Training Day will come up, right?
Yeah,
Bad Boys, which is a comedy and like just over the top. And also like The Wire is like a categorical one, right? And The Shield, which wasn't my thing. I never watched it, but like, no, these are good dramas when they have some, some people that flirt with or just like dive full into corruption
right,
and all that. Like, it's not to say that I don't think it furthers stereotypes. I mean, I'm sure that there's some material that does, but hey, like our actions should be able to speak loud enough for themselves.
right,
And not to end on this bad note, but there are enough people that ruin it for us in the industry, like in real world. So like we gotta just do our stuff louder, and keep doing what we're doing, and that's something that we frequently talk about, right? We can't let those negative like shadows overcome. But no, I mean you're. It's not for listeners. It's not an anti-cop like series.
no,
It's very much like there's people on both sides, and then it's a story of redemption and good trying to overcome evil, which is like, who doesn't like that?
right. Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you got some enjoyment out of them.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah, tons. Yeah, so for listeners, please, and it'll be in the show notes, but please let people know where they can find you, keep up
Yeah.
with what you're working on, and find your materials, find your stories.
So I'm most active on Instagram at LS_author. If you like message me there and things like that, that's where I'll get back to you. Um, Also on YouTube, we have the Men's Adventure Fiction podcast. Me and Nathaniel Hummel have been doing that for, I think, like 14 weeks now or something. But it's definitely might not be everyone's bag, but I'll pitch it anyway. It's just we love men's adventure fiction, so Indiana Jones, Yellowstone, action type stuff. We just discuss that world and the ideals of like classic heroism and classic masculinity. We discuss these in the framework of fiction, so books, movie recommendations, and things like that. And we're also working together on this short story collection called The Fighting Heart of Man. So we're looking at 9 different heroes from 9 different time periods in these short stories of classic masculinity being heroes. And we got pirate hunters, we got Western characters. We got a gambit of things that we will release on the Instagram and over the podcast over the next couple of weeks. But that's what I've been up to, and that's where you can find me.
Awesome. I love it. I'm excited and I'm intrigued. I'm like perking up, like
Yeah,
I'm into it. So no, thanks so much, Luke. And I appreciate conversations, not just for me, but for the listeners. And thanks for doing what you do.
thank you for having me. This was great.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.